So the next story emanates from an interesting opinion piece that I read on the News 24 a few days ago, and I thought I'd share it with you, and then we can have a conversation and see what you make of it. I found it quite fascinating. J&J is lagging behind on delivering the vaccines that are meant to have made it to our shores. This is having a negative impact on our rollout as a country of the life-saving jab. Candice Sehoma has penned an opinion piece that I found and thought would be, I found it to be thought-provoking, and I thought I should engage her on the conversation, on that opinion piece. She joins me now. She works with Doctors Without Borders. Candice, just in summary, you are very critical of J&J and its track record of delivery in as far as the vaccines that South Africa has procured. What is at the center of your criticism of J&J?
Thank you so much for having me. I think what is at the center of our criticism when it comes to Johnson & Johnson is their anti-competitive ways of doing things. As you know, Aspen is currently doing the fill and finish of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. However, the license agreement is quite limiting in terms of how much they can produce and how the vaccine is distributed. And hence you can find situations where vaccines are exported into the EU, overlooking the need that is in the continent and in South Africa. And that's essentially because of the license agreement that they've entered into that essentially gives power and control to J&J and very little sort of space for local manufacturers to maneuver. And I think it's something that's not new, something that we have seen in the case of TB medicine, where the same anti-competitive behavior has been apparent. Yeah. And that's what we're calling on Johnson & Johnson. Yeah.
Sorry, we will get to the point that you make, because you make the point that what's happening now is a case of old habits dying hard, and you have particular reference to the situation around multi-drug resistant TB medication. But we'll get to that in a moment. But I want to ask you about what you're calling anti-competitive behavior. How does that manifest in delays in terms of what South Africa has procured? You make the point that we've procured 31.2 million doses, and by the end of August, beginning of September, we had only received about 13%. And you believe we're not on track to receive all of them by end of year?
Yes, certainly. I think you might recall also there has been some challenges that Johnson & Johnson had faced with their plant in the US, where about 16 million vaccines were halted because of some contamination of the vaccines. And one actually questions as to why do we have so few drug substance manufacturers, and those drug substance manufacturers are only in the global north. About, I think one is in the US and two others are in the EU. And why, if they're in the interest of actually producing more, I think they would also share their technology, share their IP with other capable manufacturers to enable, or rather to enable others to be able to produce, considering that what they able, I mean, considering what they sort of supply or the capacity, it's not enough to also sort of deliver to supply the globe at large. So I think it's very important for Johnson & Johnson to transfer or share their IP and technology to other capable manufacturers, drug substance manufacturers, and I'm not talking about a fill and finish agreement as we have here with Aspen. I'm talking about the actual ingredient, the API, which at the moment is reserved for very few companies to manufacture. And that's what's actually also stalling and stagnating their ability to also deliver on time and deliver the vaccines to countries.
So you believe that the fact that, I mean, we were told that Aspen at their plant in Gqeberha have the capacity to deliver, to fill and finish, which is the correct description. They import the substance, the active substances from Johnson & Johnson, fill and finish, and also finish the packaging, etc., before dispatching. We were told they could deliver some 300 million doses, many of which will be for the African continent. You are saying that that's not really the reality. The African continent and South Africa in particular are not helped by this fill and finish agreement with Johnson & Johnson?
I think what we need to understand is that the fill and finish is actually the last leg of the process. There's still the most important part of the process is actually the drug substance production, where after that drug substance production has been done, then that vaccine is actually delivered to manufacturers like Aspen to do the fill and packaging of the vaccine. So if the drug substance manufacturers are unable to produce, that in turn actually affects even Aspen's ability to deliver, because they rely on these few companies to be able to get the drug substance, or rather the API of the vaccine. And without that, there's literally nothing that Aspen can do to go forward. So I think what's important is that those, the ingredient, the most important ingredient is only dedicated to very few companies to be able to produce that. And what we're saying is that we need more companies doing the drug substance manufacturing.
But why are you holding Johnson & Johnson in particular accountable for this, Candice? Why is this not an argument that can be made about, I don't know, Moderna, that can be made about Pfizer, for example? Is it particularly pronounced with J&J? And also, if J&J were to turn around and say, no one can predict that there will be contamination at a plant, to which we'll then have to respond, which then has an impact on our, assembly line. That's something that doesn't betray a sense of anti-competitive behavior, but it's part of the reality that if you are in manufacturing, one of the items that go into your manufacturing process can get contaminated, and you will have to halt for a moment. Just those two aspects. Why is it a problem of J&J, but also contamination happens in manufacturing from time to time?
Yeah, I think to answer your first question, it's not just the problem of Johnson & Johnson. I think what we see is actually the pharmaceutical industry as a whole. They're quite vested in anti-competitive ways of doing things. And Johnson & Johnson is very critical, particularly in South Africa, where our rural areas actually rely on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, mainly because it's more suitable for use in rural areas than it is in urban areas. And hence, due to their non-delivery, we've actually been relying a lot on the Pfizer vaccine more than the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. But I think it's not something that we're just targeting at Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a very critical vaccine, particularly for contexts like South Africa, especially rural South Africa. But also we see that these ways of doing things, even from your Pfizer, even from Moderna and all these other pharmaceutical industry. And we've been particularly interested on Johnson & Johnson because of their history, but also because of the vaccine's importance in the country.
Lastly,
and secondly,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I think just to answer the second part of the question that you questioned, I think that problem, and I think it's quite a fair thing to say that you're bound to confront challenges in whatever sort of production that you're making, but that if you were to sort of confront that problem in a particular plant, that problem we can sort of overcome the challenge of delivery if we had more drug substance production happening in other parts of the country and other parts of the globe. So just sort of limiting the production to 3 manufacturers, I think that in itself we are bound to confront these challenges.
I hear you.
Unless we actually open up the space to other manufacturers.
I hear you. Lastly, and very briefly then, Candice, you then make the point that this delay that you're talking about is a case of old habits dying hard. And the reason you say that is that you link this to Johnson & Johnson's record in as far as the drug for multi-drug resistant TB is concerned, and something about them continuing to own the IP there and making it expensive for people to access. Just tell me the story in full.
So yes, I think what we've seen also with the bedaquiline, which is a TB drug, which in actual fact was a drug that was developed using taxpayer money and philanthropic money. And a very important part of the clinical trial was actually done in South Africa. So there was contribution from South Africa. But what we see is that Johnson & Johnson is still holding the IP on bedaquiline, meaning it blocks generic entry into the market for other sort of manufacturers to enter into the market, meaning they're able to price the drug as high as they would want to, and also deciding where it would be available. So it's something that's not new, something we have seen, and this has led to TB patients resorting to using very toxic drugs for treatment due to not being able to access bedaquiline. So it's something that we've seen, and unfortunately in South Africa, bedaquiline has been patented until 2027, meaning Johnson & Johnson will sort of have control over bedaquiline and its access in South Africa until 2027 when the patent expires.
All right, fascinating conversation. Thank you for that. That is Candice Sehoma there. She is the Access Campaign Advocacy Officer at Doctors Without Borders, weighing in there. It's an interesting conversation, just talking about the processes that are involved in the production of the vaccines and their delivery, that, timeline and a production value chain. She's gone into that and is quite critical of Johnson & Johnson. I've got to mention that I've asked the team to reach out to Stavros Nicolaou of Aspen Pharmacare. Of course, it's not the same company as Johnson & Johnson, but they work together in delivering this vaccine in South Africa, just to see if he has anything to add to that conversation. We'll see if there's actually a representative from J&J directly that would be able to respond to some of Candice's criticisms.